Okay, so the last part is to look at the respiratory structures, bleh, excuse me, respiratory structures that are in the neck area. So all I'm gonna do is gonna take these pictures that I gave you guys in the PowerPoint, and I'm just gonna label them so that you can follow along with this labeling. Like maybe this is a good thing. I put a picture and see if you can label these structures that are part of the larynx. I typically go over this in the respiratory system because this to me is part of the respiratory system. Yes, it is. But since we're doing head and neck stuff, let's go over those neck structures. Just if you recall, if we go back here, right? The respiratory system is situated ventrally or anterior to the gut tube because it buds off from the gut tube and comes forward. So what happens is when it buds off and comes forward, some of those pharyngeal structures, the pharyngeal pouch structures start to create cartilages, and the cartilages are around in the neck area, and they actually create the larynx and the trachea. So the tubes that are going to help air move back and forth towards the nasal cavity. Okay. So what we should see here is like you have the hyoid bone. And the hyoid bone, remember, is the only bone in the body that doesn't articulate with another bone. It's actually going to be attached by muscle and then some ligaments to various locations. So what you should see is that the hyoid bone is also right here as well. And then this very large cartilage here in the front that, I don't know, sort of reminds me of like a wedding dress. You know, everybody asks you when you get married, like, oh, what did your wedding dress look like? Did you have a plunging neckline? Did you have a this neckline? For some reason, it reminds me of that. This is the thyroid cartilage. It's the thyroid cartilage because actually what you're going to see later in 2240 is there's a gland that's situated right on the outside of it called the thyroid gland right here. This is the big shield-like cartilage that actually is missing in the posterior section, and its main job is to make sure that the airway stays open and protect the slit-like opening where air travels through, and that slit-like opening right there is called the glottis. Okay, so you just want to think about this is a tube, and then in the tube, there's a slit in that tube, and air's passing through that slit, and sometimes that slit's open, and sometimes it's closed, okay? Then the cartilage that's underneath it, this one is a ring-like cartilage that's going to go all the way back around. So you can see that part and that part right there and come all the way back around. This is the cricoid cartilage. I feel like maybe white is not the best option on that back right there. So again, the cricoid cartilage and the thyroid cartilage, their main jobs are to protect the glottis. The cricoid cartilage also has like a secondary function where it's going to allow these other cartilages to sit on top of it. So this one that kind of looks like a large triangle or like an uppercase A, these are the arytenoid cartilages. I totally spelled that wrong, I know. Whoever names these things in anatomy, sometimes you just wonder, right? So you can't really see the arytenoid cartilages here. It'd kind of be like right there-ish. But basically, these are going to be attached to muscles down here. And those muscles, when they contract, they actually pull the arytenoid cartilages towards each other and away from each other. And when that happens, it's going to open and close that opening known as the glottis. Because you're going to see that there's, so you're going to have vocal folds, these vocal cords, basically ligaments that are going from the arytenoid cartilage there to the front of the thyroid cartilage. So as you pull on those, it opens and closes the glottis area. And then this big flap in the back that kind of looks like a leaf structure here and here, this is the epiglottis. Remember on our half area or our sagittally sectioned image here, the epiglottis is that flap. So this is actually elastic cartilage that can flap over and then it recoils and comes back up. And its job is to mainly flap over. And when it does, you can see that it's going to close off the larynx so that food doesn't go into the larynx. Because we can see this part right here, that's actually the laryngopharynx. And then all the way into the back here, this is the esophagus. So that's most of the cartilages for the larynx. There are 2 other cartilages for the larynx that we're not going to worry about for now. Then you see that coming off the cricoid cartilage here is the trachea. Okay. The trachea is going to have rings of cartilages. Actually, they're not complete rings. They have a flattened back on the back side. And this is where the esophagus essentially would be. So you see how the esophagus is this tube here. I should have made that green. Is that tube there. And it's mostly collapsed. It's going to be collapsed until food enters in it. But the back of the trachea is also flexible. So if you eat something really big, essentially if you don't swallow very well, what ends up happening is it pushes the trachea inward a little bit so that food can go all the way down. Okay, so you have to be careful. You have to swallow really well, because if you don't swallow really well, even though it's going into the esophagus, you're going to have a gag reflex, essentially. That gag reflex is going to be recognized by the medulla oblongata, and it's going to tell you to start coughing and maybe vomit, like all that sorts of really bad things. So the function of this respiratory stuff is protection and allowing for air to pass through, but also phonation. So if you put, a scope down the throat, you can see something like this, where here, that's the flap of you can see that's the epiglottis flap right there. And then you see these white parts. So those are the vocal cords with the glottis going between them. And then you have mucosa closing off that tube, right? And then we have our arytenoid cartilages here and here. Those are the arytenoid cartilages in the posterior part. And you might be wondering, like, what the heck is happening? Basically, as the vocal cords are closed and resonating, that means they're exhaling and talking. As soon as the vocal cords open and the glottis opens, that's an inhalation, and talking has stopped. So the larynx also has the role of actually doing phonation or speech. Okay, phonation is the actual speech part, and sound production. Sound production is phonation, and then speech is actually being able to use that vibration that you created to create words. So on this video down here, what you can kind of see is that the tongue and the lips are being used, and you also see how this is the epiglottis right there. Maybe you can see a little bit of the beginning part of the larynx, how it's moving forward and backwards, the thyroid cartilage, in order to create different sounds. So moving the thyroid cartilage forward and backwards creates tone, meaning like you're either going to talk really high or really deep. Okay. And then moving the tongue and the lips creates consonants, creates vowels. So that creates the sounds that we commonly refer to as speech sounds. So that's a little bit of some things to help you. Wow, I totally didn't actually change this at the back end of my PowerPoint. Just ignore all that stuff. I do a lot of copy and pasting, and I totally forgot to change this summary, but I'll change it for you guys really quick. In summary, you should know there's 2 great tubes in the head, right? 2 great tubes in the body in general. You're going to have dorsal hollow nerve tube and the gut tube. You want to understand, and let me just go back to here. You want to understand dorsal hollow nerve tube is in the back, gut tube is in the front, and that the respiratory system is going to be butting off of the gut tube, which means it's more ventrally situated. So when we look at the neck area, and we take a cross section of our neck area, we had to have dorsal hollow nerve tube, notochord. You don't have a dorsal aorta. That's super weird. You'll still have gut tube, and then in front of that, there'll be another tube like that. That's the trachea. So trachea is all the way in the front. When we get to the chest area is also arranged in a slightly weird way because the respiratory system is in front of the gut tube. But then you also have the heart and lungs, and it becomes more complicated. But hopefully you see the different structures of the gut tube and how deglutition works, and then also different structures of the respiratory system and how phonation, very simplistically, how sound production and phonation work.